"Can I mow your lawn in exchange for food?" I asked my daughter, who hadn't spoken to me in 6 years. She replied, "I already did my charity this week. Go find help at a nursing home." I simply answered, "Okay." The next day, she got a visit from a notary. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Jason, and I'm 63 years old. 6 years ago, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. Today, I stood on my daughter's perfectly manicured front porch, my hands trembling as I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through what I knew was a 4-bedroom house in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. I could hear children laughing inside, and for a moment my heart lifted. Those were my grandchildren's voices, kids I hadn't seen since they were toddlers. The door opened, and there she was, Layla, my little girl, now 35, wearing an expensive-looking blouse and perfectly applied makeup. Her blonde hair was styled in a way that probably cost more than I'd spent on food this month. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her expression change from confusion to recognition to something that felt like disgust. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I tried to stand straighter, tried to hide how much weight I'd lost, how my clothes hung loose on my frame. The shirt I was wearing had a small tear near the collar that I'd tried to mend with thread that didn't quite match. My shoes had holes that I'd covered with duct tape on the inside, hoping it wouldn't show. "Hello, Layla. You look beautiful. Healthy." My voice came out rougher than I intended. I was wondering if maybe I could cut your grass or do some yard work. "In exchange for a meal." The words burned coming out of my mouth. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd carried on my shoulders, taught to ride a bike, walked down the aisle at her wedding, and here I was, begging her for scraps like a stray dog. Layla's eyes narrowed. She glanced over her shoulder, probably making sure her husband Ryan wasn't listening. Ryan had never liked me much, said I was too working class for his taste, even back when I had steady work and could afford to take my family to decent restaurants. "Dad, what happened to you?" She asked, but there wasn't concern in her voice. There was irritation. "You look terrible." I swallowed hard. How could I explain the last 6 years? How could I tell her about the medical bills that ate through my savings when my back gave out? How the factory where I'd worked for 22 years closed down and moved operations overseas? How every job interview ended the same way when they saw my age? "Times have been tough, sweetheart." "I lost my job, had some health problems. Nothing serious," I lied quickly, not wanting her to worry. "I just need to get back on my feet. I'm not asking for handouts. I want to work for whatever you can spare." She looked me up and down again, and I saw her take in my appearance more carefully. The way my jeans had patches on the knees, the fact that I was wearing the same winter jacket in July because it was the only one I had that didn't have holes. The way my hands shook slightly from not eating much more than a package of crackers in the past 2 days. "I can do a good job," I pressed on, desperate to convince her. "I may be older, but I'm still strong. I know you've got a big yard here. Must be expensive to maintain. I could save you some money." That's when I heard footsteps behind her. Ryan appeared in the doorway, his arm sliding possessively around Layla's waist. He was wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than I used to make in a week, and his hair was perfectly styled. Everything about him screamed money and success. "Jason," he said, not bothering to hide his distaste. "What's this about?" Layla looked up at her husband, and I saw something pass between them. Some silent conversation that didn't include me. "Dad wants to do yard work for food," she said, and I caught the embarrassment in her voice. She was embarrassed by me, her own father. Ryan's eyebrows shot up and he let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. "Seriously? That's what it's come to?" I felt my face burn with shame, but I stood my ground. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering to work." "Dad," Layla said, her voice taking on that tone I remembered from when she was a teenager, like I was being unreasonable. "This is awkward. I have neighbors. What are they going to think if they see my father doing manual labor in my yard?" The words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about what other people would think. "I could come early in the morning before anyone's around," I offered quietly. That's when Ryan stepped forward slightly, putting himself between me and Layla. "Look, Jason, I think you need to face reality here. You can't just show up after 6 years expecting us to bail you out. I'm not expecting anything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm asking to work. Layla sighed heavily. Dad, I already did my charity for the week. I donated to the food bank on Sunday. Maybe you should look into getting help at a senior center or something. There are places for people in your situation. The words hung in the air between us, my charity for the week. Like I was some stranger, she'd helped out of the goodness of her heart. Not the man who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for her college, who'd spent his nights helping with homework and his weekends at her soccer games. Maybe try one of those senior living facilities, Ryan added helpfully. They have programs for people who can't take care of themselves anymore. I looked at my daughter's face, searching for any sign of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared, who used to beg me to read her one more story before bed. But all I saw was a woman who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be managed. Okay, I said finally, the word coming out small and broken. That's all I could manage. Just okay. I turned around and walked back down their pristine walkway, past the flower beds that clearly received professional care, past the new luxury cars in their driveway. My old pickup truck looked like a rusted dinosaur next to their vehicles. Behind me, I heard the door close. Not slam, just a quiet final click. I sat in my truck for a long time before starting the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel, so hard my knuckles turned white. The worst part wasn't the hunger gnawing at my stomach or the knowledge that I'd have to figure out where to sleep tonight. The worst part was seeing how easy it was for her to dismiss me. 6 years ago, when things started falling apart, I'd told myself that Layla was just busy with her new life, her young family. I'd convinced myself that she'd come around eventually, that we'd work through whatever had driven us apart. But sitting in that truck, looking at her perfect house with its perfect lawn and perfect life, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't her father anymore. I was just an inconvenience she'd rather not deal with. The next morning, I was sitting on a park bench downtown, trying to make a cup of gas station coffee last as long as possible, when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, and I almost didn't answer. Bill collectors had been calling for months, and I'd learned it was better to just let them go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. Is this Jason Mitchell? The voice was professional, crisp. Yes, this is Jason. Mr. Mitchell, this is Patricia Santos from Santos Legal Services. I'm a notary public, and I need to meet with you regarding some important documentation. Would you be available this afternoon? I frowned. I think you might have the wrong person. I haven't requested any notary services. This concerns the estate of Harold Mitchell. You are his son, correct? My father. Dad had been dead for 15 years, and as far as I knew, everything had been settled long ago. He'd left the house to my mother, and when she passed 5 years later, Layla and I had sold it to pay for her medical bills. Yes, he was my father, but his estate was settled years ago. Mr. Mitchell, I'm afraid there's been an oversight, a significant one. I really need to meet with you in person. This is quite urgent. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. What kind of oversight? I'd prefer to discuss this face-to-face. Are you familiar with the Riverside Diner on Main Street? I could meet you there in 2 hours. I looked down at my clothes, the same ones I'd worn yesterday and slept in last night in my truck. Ma'am, I should tell you, I'm not in the best situation right now financially. If there are fees involved, Mr. Mitchell, please, just meet me. Trust me, fees won't be your concern after our conversation. 2 hours later, I sat in a corner booth at the Riverside Diner, nursing another cup of coffee and trying not to look as desperate as I felt. Patricia Santos turned out to be a middle-aged Hispanic woman in a Navy business suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than anything I'd owned in years. She slid into the booth across from me, her expression serious, but not unkind. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for meeting me. I know this must seem unusual. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I represent the law firm that handled your grandfather's estate, your father's father, Marcus Mitchell. I shook my head. My grandfather died when I was 12. There was no estate to speak of. He worked at the grain elevator his whole life. Patricia's eyebrows rose. I'm afraid that's where the oversight occurred. Mr. Mitchell, Your grandfather owned property that your family apparently never knew about. Property that has been held in trust for decades, accruing value. She pulled out a legal document and turned it toward me. The words swam before my eyes, but I caught phrases that made my heart race. Property deed, mineral rights, current assessed value. I don't understand, I whispered. Your grandfather purchased 200 acres of land in 1952 in what was then considered worthless desert in Nevada. He bought it for back taxes, paid just $800 total. The paperwork got lost in the system when he died, and somehow, your father never received notification of the inheritance. She pointed to a number on the page, and I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. The land is currently assessed at $4.2 million. But Mr. Mitchell, that's just the land value. 3 years ago, a geological survey discovered significant mineral deposits. The mining rights alone are worth an estimated $12 million. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. Other diners turned to look, but I barely noticed. $16 million. $16 million. This has to be a mistake, I said, my voice barely audible. No mistake. I have all the documentation here. The land has been managed by a property management company for decades, and they've been looking for the rightful heir. It took them this long to track you down because of the administrative errors from the original estate filing. He pulled out more papers. There's more, Mr. Mitchell. The property management company has been leasing portions of the land for agriculture. There's approximately $340,000 in back rent payments waiting for you. I stared at the papers, unable to process what I was hearing. Yesterday I had been begging my daughter for a meal. Today I was apparently a millionaire several times over. What do I need to do? I asked. Sign these documents to claim your inheritance. I'll need to verify your identity with your driver's license and birth certificate, but I can process everything today. My hands were shaking as I reached for my wallet. My driver's license was there, but it would expire next month because I couldn't afford the renewal fee. My birth certificate was in a storage unit I hadn't been able to pay for in 3 months. As if reading my mind, Patricia said gently, "If you don't have all the documents with you, I can work with what you have and help you obtain copies of anything missing. This inheritance is legally yours, Mr. Mitchell. Nothing can change that." While she prepared the paperwork, I excused myself to use the restroom. Really, I just needed a moment alone to process what was happening. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. The same tired, weathered face that had looked back at me this morning when I'd cleaned up in a gas station bathroom. But everything had changed. When I returned to the table, Patricia had laid out several documents for my signature. Once you sign these, you'll have immediate access to the rental income funds, and we can begin the process of deciding what you want to do with the property. You can sell it, develop it, or continue leasing it as passive income. I picked up the pen, and then I stopped. Ms. Santos, how long have you been trying to find me? About 2 years actively. The search was complicated by your father's legal name being slightly different on various documents. 2 years. For 2 years, while I'd been struggling to survive, losing my home, my health deteriorating, sleeping in my truck, this inheritance had been waiting for me. While my daughter had been building her perfect life in her perfect house with her perfect family, treating me like a burden she couldn't afford to acknowledge, I signed the documents. An hour later, I walked out of that diner with a certified check for $340,000 in my pocket and the knowledge that I was worth more than $16 million on paper. For the first time in 6 years, I had choices. And the first choice I needed to make was what to do about Layla. I drove slowly through town, past the neighborhoods where families were living their normal lives, past the places I used to call home when I had a home to call my own. But instead of heading toward Layla's neighborhood, I turned toward the rougher part of town, where I'd spent the last few weeks parking my truck at night. There was a homeless shelter there and a soup kitchen that served meals to anyone who needed them. I'd been too proud to use either one, but I'd seen the people who did. Veterans like myself, elderly folks who'd fallen through the cracks, families who'd lost everything through no fault of their own. People who reminded me of who I'd been yesterday. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a long time, thinking about Layla's face when she'd told me she'd already done her charity for the week. Tomorrow she would find out about the inheritance. In a town this size, news traveled fast, especially news about sudden wealth. I wondered what she would say then. That evening, I checked into a modest hotel for the first time in months. It wasn't fancy, but it had clean sheets, hot water, and a door I could lock. As I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the certified check on the nightstand, memories began flooding back like water through a broken dam. I remembered the day Layla was born, 29 years old, working double shifts at the factory, and scared out of my mind about becoming a father. When the nurse placed that tiny red-faced bundle in my arms, I made a promise. I would never let anything bad happen to her. I would give her everything I never had, and I kept that promise even when it nearly killed me. Sarah, my wife, had complications after Layla's birth. The medical bills started piling up before we even brought the baby home. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. So I took on extra shifts, worked weekends, picked up odd jobs during my lunch breaks. When Layla was 3, Sarah got pregnant again. We were overjoyed, finally able to give Layla a sibling. But something went wrong at 26 weeks. We lost the baby, and Sarah nearly died from the complications. The medical bills from that nightmare were catastrophic. Even with payment plans, we were drowning. I sold my motorcycle, the one thing I'd owned that was truly mine. Then I sold my tools, my hunting rifles, anything that wasn't nailed down. I worked 70-hour weeks for 2 years straight, barely seeing my family, just to keep us afloat. Layla was too young to understand why Daddy was always tired, always stressed, always worried about money. She just knew that other kids' fathers came to school plays and soccer games, and hers didn't. Other dads helped with homework after dinner, while hers fell asleep at the kitchen table with bills spread around him like a paper fortress. When she was 8, Sarah was diagnosed with depression, the kind that made it hard for her to get out of bed, hard to take care of herself, let alone an energetic little girl. So I became everything. Father, mother, breadwinner, caretaker. I learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight. I figured out how to make Halloween costumes from cardboard and fabric scraps. I attended every school conference, every concert, every game I could possibly manage, but it was never enough. By the time Layla reached high school, the distance between us had grown into a chasm. We saw other families where the parents could afford to take vacations, buy name-brand clothes, drive cars that weren't held together with prayer and duct tape. She was embarrassed by our small house, our second-hand furniture, the way I looked in my work clothes when I picked her up from school. I remember one particular evening when she was 16. She'd been invited to a party at one of her classmates' houses, and she begged me to drop her off a block away. "Please, Dad, just let me walk the last part." "Why, sweetheart? It's raining." She looked at me with those eyes that used to light up when I came home from work, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. Because your truck is embarrassing, okay? Because everyone's going to see it and know we're poor. The words cut deeper than any physical wound I'd ever received. But what hurt more was the realization that she was right. We were poor. And despite working myself into the ground for 18 years, I hadn't been able to give her the life she wanted. Sarah died when Layla was 19, just starting her sophomore year of college. The funeral costs wiped out what little savings I'd managed to accumulate. I took out loans to keep Layla in school, worked 3 jobs to make the payments. That's when I met Ryan's parents at Layla's graduation. The Hendersons, old money, the kind of family that had never worried about paying for anything. They looked at me in my ill-fitting suit and discount store shoes like I was something they'd scrape off their shoe. "So you're Layla's father," Mrs. Henderson had said, her voice polite but cool. "She's told us so much about you." I knew from her tone that whatever Layla had told them, it wasn't flattering. 6 months later, Layla announced her engagement to Ryan. The wedding was everything she'd ever dreamed of, everything I could never have afforded to give her. The Hendersons paid for it all, and made sure everyone knew it. I remember standing in the church, watching my little girl walk down the aisle in a dress that cost more than I made in 3 months. She looked beautiful, radiant, happy, and when she reached the altar, she looked back at the congregation and smiled at everyone except me. After the wedding, the invitations to family dinners became less frequent. Holidays were spent with the Hendersons because they had the bigger house, the better food, the more comfortable lifestyle. I understood. I even told myself it was better for Layla, that she deserved nice things. But understanding and acceptance are two different things. The final break came 6 years ago when I lost my job at the factory. 22 years of loyal service, and they laid me off with 2 weeks' notice and a handshake. At 57, I was too old for most employers, too young to retire. I called Layla to let her know what had happened, hoping maybe she could help me network, put in a good word somewhere. Ryan worked for a big company, had connections. "Dad, this is really bad timing," she'd said. "Ryan just got promoted, and we're trying to buy a bigger house. We can't afford to take on any additional stress right now." Additional stress. That's what I'd become to my own daughter. "I'm not asking for money, sweetheart. I just thought maybe Ryan might know of some opening somewhere." There was a long pause. "Dad, honestly, maybe this is a sign that it's time for you to think about scaling back. You're getting older. Maybe look into some kind of assisted living situation." Assisted living. I was 57 years old, and my daughter was already trying to put me away somewhere. That was the last real conversation we'd had. Oh, there were a few phone calls after that, stilted and awkward, usually around holidays when guilt forced her to check in. But she'd made it clear that I was a problem she didn't want to deal with. So I stopped calling, stopped expecting, stopped hoping that the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap watching cartoons would remember that I was the same man who had worked himself into the ground, trying to give her a better life. Now, sitting in this hotel room with $16 million worth of paperwork in front of me, I thought about all the times I'd lain awake wondering what I'd done wrong. All the nights I'd replayed conversations, trying to figure out where I'd failed as a father. But maybe I hadn't failed. Maybe I'd just loved someone who wasn't capable of loving me back the same way. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Layla's number. For a moment I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello? Dad?" Her voice was different, shaky. "Dad, I just heard something. Mrs. Peterson from down the street called me. She said there was a notary at the diner today asking about you. Something about an inheritance." I closed my eyes. It had taken less than 24 hours for the news to start spreading. "Yes, Layla, that's true. Is it real? The amount she heard?" "What amount did she hear?" "She said someone at the diner overheard the notary say $16 million. That's crazy, right? That can't be real." I looked at the papers spread across the hotel bed, the official documents with their official seals and official dollar amounts. "It's real." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, very quietly, she said, "Oh my God." I waited for her to say something else, an apology maybe, some acknowledgement of what she'd said to me less than 48 hours ago. Instead, she said, "Dad, we need to talk. Can I come see you? Where are you staying?" And there it was. Just like that, I was no longer an embarrassment or additional stress. I was someone she needed to see. "I'm at the Comfort Inn on Route 9, room 214. I'll be right there." After she hung up, I sat back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Part of me had hoped that when this moment came, when she found out about the money, she would surprise me, that she would call to apologize for how she'd treated me, not because she'd learned I was wealthy, but because she'd realized it was wrong. But I'd always known better, and deep down, so had she. Layla arrived at my hotel room exactly 37 minutes after our phone call. I know because I watched the digital clock on the nightstand, counting every minute, wondering what I would say to her. She knocked softly, and when I opened the door, she looked different. Her perfect makeup was smudged around her eyes, like she'd been crying during the drive over. Her expensive blouse was wrinkled, and her hands were shaking as she clutched her purse. "Dad," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. I stepped aside to let her in. She looked around the modest hotel room, taking in the basic furniture, the papers scattered across the bed, the single small suitcase that contained everything I owned in the world. "You're really staying here?" she asked. "It's clean and quiet." She sat down in the single chair by the window, and I sat on the edge of the bed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Finally, she said, "Is it true? About the inheritance?" I nodded toward the papers. $16,200,000, give or take. She let out a shaky breath. Dad, I had no idea. If I had known yesterday that you were... That I was what, Layla? She looked down at her hands. That you had resources. That this was just temporary. And if it wasn't temporary? If I really was just a broke old man with nowhere to go? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I picked up one of the legal documents and handed it to her. She read through it slowly, her eyes widening as she processed the details. $16 million, she whispered. Dad, do you understand what this means? You're set for life. You could buy a beautiful house, travel, do whatever you want. Yes, I could. You could help. I mean, if you wanted to. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I could help you, I said. Is that what you're trying to say? Her cheeks flushed red. I didn't come here for money. Why did you come here, Layla? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that you hate me now. I studied my daughter's face. The little girl who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares was still there, hidden beneath years of carefully constructed walls. I don't hate you, Layla. Relief flooded her features. Thank God. Dad, I know I haven't been the best daughter lately. Things have been complicated with Ryan's family and the kids and everything, but now that your situation has improved, we can start over. We can be a real family again. Start over. As if the past 6 years could be erased with the discovery of an inheritance. Tell me about your life, I said instead. How are the children? Her face lit up the way it used to when she was young and excited about something. Emma just turned 8, and she's doing so well in school. She's in advanced math and reading. And Tyler is 5 now, and he's starting kindergarten in the fall. He's obsessed with dinosaurs. I'd like to meet them. Of course. They'd love to meet their grandfather. Emma asks about you sometimes. What do you tell her? Layla shifted uncomfortably. I tell her that Grandpa lives far away and we don't see him very often. I live 23 miles from your house. She looked away. Dad, let's not dwell on the past. What matters is the future. What matters is that we can build a relationship now. But I couldn't let it go. Not this time. Yesterday, when I asked to cut your grass for a meal, what did you think was going to happen to me? I don't understand. After you closed the door, after you told me to find help at a senior center, what did you think I was going to do? Where did you think I was going to go? She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was such a shock seeing you like that. Like what? Poor, she whispered. You looked so poor. The honesty of it was devastating. Not because she'd said it, but because it was true. To Layla, my worth as a human being was directly tied to my financial status. When I had money, I was worthy of love and respect. When I didn't, I was an embarrassment to be hidden away. Layla, do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted that expensive bike for your birthday? The one all your friends had? She nodded, wiping her eyes. I worked overtime for 3 months to afford it, 60-hour weeks, 7 days straight, no time off. I was so tired I could barely stand up, but I wanted you to have that bike. I remember. I loved that bike. Do you remember what happened 2 weeks after I gave it to you? Her face went pale. She remembered. You told your friends that your mother's parents bought it for you, because you were embarrassed that your father had to work so hard to afford something that came easily to their families. Dad, I was 12. I didn't understand. You were embarrassed by my sacrifice, just like you were embarrassed yesterday when I offered to work for food. She was sobbing now, her carefully composed facade completely shattered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know I've been terrible, but I can make it up to you now. We can be close again. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. My old truck sat next to her pristine SUV, rust and dents, contrasting sharply with glossy paint and chrome. Where do you think I've been living, Layla? I assumed you had an apartment somewhere. I've been living in my truck for the past 2 months, showering at truck stops, eating whatever I could afford. Some nights I parked under the bridge on Highway 12, the one you drive over every day on your way to drop the kids off at school. Her sharp intake of breath told me she understood. She'd been driving past me, literally over my head, without knowing it. You drove past me dozens of times and never saw me, never wondered where I was or if I was okay. But now that you know I have money, you're ready to be a family again. Dad, please. I know how this looks, but I do love you. I've always loved you. I turned back to face her. Do you know what love is, Layla? Of course I do. Love is working 70-hour weeks so your child can have the things her friends have. Love is selling your possessions so your family has a roof over their heads. Love is staying up all night when your child is sick, even though you have to work the next day. Love is sacrifice without expectation of reward. She was quiet, listening. What you feel for me isn't love, sweetheart. It's need. You love what I can provide for you, not who I am. That's not true. When you found out about the inheritance, what was your first thought? She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Your first thought was about what it meant for you, how it could help you, what you could get from it. That's not love, Layla. That's opportunism. I sat back down on the bed, feeling suddenly exhausted. The emotional weight of the past 2 days was catching up with me. I want to know my grandchildren, I said quietly, but I won't buy my way into their lives, and I won't pretend that money has magically fixed the problems between us. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want a relationship with me, it has to be real. It has to be based on more than what I can do for you financially. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. How do I prove that to you? I don't know if you can. The words hung heavy in the air between us. She looked like I'd slapped her. Dad, please, don't shut me out. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to do better. I want to be the daughter you deserve. The daughter I deserved wouldn't have let me beg for food on her doorstep. She flinched, as if I'd hit her. I can't change what happened yesterday. No, you can't. But yesterday wasn't the problem, Layla. Yesterday was just the culmination of 6 years of you treating me like I didn't exist. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it slightly. I think you should go now. She looked panicked. Dad, wait, please. Can we at least talk about this more? Can I come see you tomorrow? I'll be busy tomorrow. Doing what? I thought about the homeless shelter I'd seen, about the soup kitchen, about all the people who were living the way I'd been living just 2 days ago. I'm going to figure out how to spend $16 million in a way that actually means something. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Dad, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd loved more than my own life for 35 years, and felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of peaceful resignation. I already have forgiven you, Layla. That was never the question. Then, what is the question? The question is whether you can forgive yourself, and whether you can become the kind of person who deserves forgiveness. After she left, I sat in the quiet hotel room for a long time, thinking about love and money and the difference between the two. Tomorrow, I would start making decisions about my future. Tonight, I just needed to grieve for the relationship I'd always hoped we could have, but probably never would. 3 weeks passed before I saw Layla again, and those 3 weeks changed everything. I had moved out of the hotel and into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the quiet side of town. Nothing fancy, just clean and comfortable, with a small kitchen and a view of the park where children played in the evenings. I could have bought a mansion, could have purchased the biggest house in the most exclusive neighborhood, but I didn't want that kind of attention. Instead, I spent my days visiting places I'd never had time to see before. The homeless shelter on Oak Street, the Veterans Center downtown, the senior community center where elderly folks gathered to play cards and share stories about better times. What I found broke my heart and opened my eyes in ways I hadn't expected. At the shelter, I met Frank, a 72-year-old man who'd lost his home when medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment consumed their life savings. He slept on a cot in a room with 12 other men, and during the day he sat in the park feeding pigeons and talking to anyone who would listen about his deceased wife, Margaret. At the Veterans Center, I encountered dozens of men and women who'd served their country with honor, only to come home to a society that had forgotten them. Some struggled with injuries, others with trauma, all of them trying to navigate systems that seemed designed to wear them down rather than lift them up. And at the senior center, I discovered people like myself, folks who'd worked their entire lives and somehow still ended up with nothing to show for it except worn hands and fading memories. These weren't lazy people or addicts or criminals. They were teachers and factory workers and nurses and mechanics. They were mothers and fathers and grandparents whose only crime was living long enough to outlast their usefulness to a world that valued productivity over humanity. I started small. I paid Frank's medical bills, the ones that had been haunting him for 3 years. I covered the rent for Mrs. Chen, an 80-year-old woman who was facing eviction because her Social Security didn't stretch far enough. I bought groceries for the Williams family, whose grandfather was too proud to accept charity, but whose grandchildren were eating cereal for dinner because it was all they could afford. None of them knew where the help was coming from. I made sure of that. I worked through social workers and church volunteers, always anonymously, always quietly. But word spreads in small communities, especially when good things start happening to people who rarely experience good fortune. That's how Layla found me. I was at the Veterans Center on a Thursday afternoon playing chess with a man named Robert who'd lost his left arm in Vietnam and his house in a predatory lending scheme when she walked in. She looked around the sparse room with its mismatched chairs and flickering fluorescent lights, clearly out of place in her designer clothes and perfect makeup. "Dad?" The chess game stopped. Robert looked between us with curiosity, and several other veterans turned to see what was happening. "Hello, Layla." She approached our table hesitantly. "Can we talk?" I looked at Robert, who nodded, and began putting the chess pieces back in their box. "We can finish this game tomorrow, Jason." "Why?" I followed Layla outside to the parking lot where her spotless SUV sat next to my old truck. She looked at my vehicle with something I couldn't quite identify. Not embarrassment this time, but maybe recognition. "I've been looking for you," she said. "Your hotel said you'd checked out." "I got an apartment." "Where?" I gave her the address, and she frowned. "Dad, that's not a great neighborhood." "It's fine. What did you want to talk about?" She took a deep breath. "People are talking about you, about things you've been doing around town." I waited. Mrs. Patterson's medical bills were mysteriously paid off last week. The Henderson family suddenly had their utilities turned back on after being shut off for 2 months. 3 families at Emma's school had their lunch debts cleared anonymously. She paused, studying my face. "It's you, isn't it? You're giving your money away." "Some of it." "Dad, you can't just throw away $16 million on strangers?" "Dear." The word strangers hit me like a physical blow. These people weren't strangers to me anymore. Frank had shown me pictures of his grandchildren. Mrs. Chen had taught me how to make proper dumplings. Robert and I discussed books and philosophy between chess moves. They're not strangers. "Dad, be practical. You need to think about your future, about your family." "I am thinking about my family." Her face lit up with hope. "Does that mean—" "I'm thinking about the family I've chosen. The people who treat me with kindness and respect regardless of what's in my bank account." The hope died in her eyes. "Dad, please, I know I hurt you, but don't punish me by giving our inheritance away to random people." "Our inheritance?" I almost laughed at the audacity of it. "This isn't your inheritance, Layla. This is mine. But I'm your daughter. When you die, it should come to me and the kids." "Should it? Why?" "Because that's how families work. Parents leave things to their children. Tell me, what have you done to earn an inheritance?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "I'm your daughter." "That's an accident of birth, not an achievement." Her face hardened. "So you're going to give $16 million to homeless people and veterans instead of your own flesh and blood?" "I'm going to give my money to people who've shown me love and respect. People who welcomed me into their community when I had nothing. People who see value in me beyond what I can provide financially." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I felt something snap inside me. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that Frank lost everything taking care of his dying wife while insurance companies found excuses not to pay? Is it fair that Robert came home from war missing an arm and got tricked into a mortgage that cost him his home. Is it fair that Mrs. Chen worked as a seamstress for 50 years and still can't afford her rent? That's different. How is it different? Because they're not your responsibility. Neither are you, apparently. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were true. For 6 years, Layla had made it clear that she didn't want me to be part of her life unless I could contribute something valuable. Well, now I was contributing, just not to her. Dad, I made mistakes. I know that. But you can't just abandon your own family. I didn't abandon you, Layla. You abandoned me. I'm just finally accepting it. She started crying then, the same tears she'd cried in my hotel room 3 weeks ago. But this time, they felt different, less genuine, more calculated. What about Emma and Tyler? Don't they deserve to have a grandfather who can help with their college funds, their future? They deserve to have a grandfather who knows their names, their birthdays, their favorite colors. They deserve a grandfather who's been part of their lives, not just their bank account. It doesn't have to be like that. We can start fresh, can we? Right now, as we're standing here talking, what do you know about my life? She looked confused. What do you mean? You know where I live, what I do with my days, who my friends are, what makes me happy or sad or angry. She opened her mouth, then closed it. You don't know anything about me except that I have money. And that's the only reason you're here. That's not true, isn't it? If the inheritance had been 100,000 instead of 16 million, would you be here right now? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I walked back toward the Veterans Center, then turned around. Layla, I want you to understand something. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you anymore. You became exactly what your environment taught you to become. But I won't pretend that money can fix what's broken between us. What can fix it? I thought about that for a long moment. Time, maybe. If you can learn to value people for who they are instead of what they can do for you. If you can teach your children that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank balance. If you can become someone who would have helped a hungry old man even if he wasn't your father. How long will that take? I don't know. Maybe forever. As I walked back into the Veterans Center, I heard her call after me. Dad, what should I tell the kids about their grandfather? I stopped but didn't turn around. Tell them their grandfather loves them, and that love isn't something you can inherit. It's something you have to earn. Inside, Robert was setting up the chessboard again. He looked up when I sat down. Family troubles? Something like that. Money changes people, he said quietly. Sometimes it reveals who they really were all along. We played chess in comfortable silence, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace. Not because I had money, but because I was finally using it in a way that honored the man I'd tried to be my whole life. Outside in the parking lot, Layla sat in her SUV for a long time before finally driving away. I wondered if she would try again, if she would keep coming back until she wore me down. But I also wondered if maybe, just maybe, she might surprise me and become the kind of person who wouldn't need to. 2 years later, I stood in the backyard of the house I'd purchased on Maple Street, watching as Frank tended to the tomato garden we'd planted together. The house wasn't much to look at from the outside, a modest 3-bedroom ranch that had seen better days, but it had become something beautiful. It had become home. Not just for me, but for the 6 other people who now lived here. Frank had the room overlooking the garden. Mrs. Chen had the sunny front bedroom where she could watch the neighborhood children walk to school each morning. Robert had the basement apartment he'd insisted on because he liked the quiet. The other rooms housed rotating guests, people who needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet, veterans waiting for housing assistance, elderly folks whose families had forgotten them. We called ourselves the Maple Street family, though none of us were related by blood. What we shared was something more valuable: mutual respect, genuine care, and the understanding that everyone deserves dignity regardless of their circumstances. I had used $3 million to buy and renovate the house, another $2 million to establish a trust fund that would keep it running in perpetuity. The rest of the inheritance sat in investments, quietly growing, waiting for the next person who needed help getting back on their feet. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had more family now than I'd ever had before, and none of them shared my DNA. "Jason," Mrs. Chen called from the kitchen window. "Phone for you." I walked inside, wiping dirt from my hands on an old towel. The kitchen smelled like the dumplings she'd been preparing for dinner, and I could hear Robert in the living room explaining chess strategy to Marcus, a young veteran who had been staying with us for the past month. "Hello, Mr. Mitchell? This is Sarah Williams from Riverside Elementary School. I was calling about your granddaughter, Emma." My heart stopped. Emma was 9 now, though I'd never officially met her. I'd seen her from a distance a few times, walking to school or playing in the park, but Layla had made sure our paths never crossed. "What about Emma? Is she hurt?" "Oh no, nothing like that. I'm calling because Emma has been asking about you. She's been quite persistent, actually. She says she knows you live somewhere in town and she wants to meet you." I sat down heavily in one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. What exactly has she been saying? "Well, yesterday during our family tree project, she drew you on her chart. When I asked her about it, she said her mom told her that her grandfather lives far away, but she found out from a friend's mother that you actually live right here in town. She wants to know why she can't see you." The teacher paused. "Mr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the phone book. But Emma seems quite upset about this, and I thought maybe you and her mother could work something out. Has her mother been contacted about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Emma specifically asked me to call you instead of her mother." Smart girl. She'd inherited more than just genes from me, apparently. "Miss Williams, I appreciate you calling, but the situation between Emma's mother and me is complicated." She mentioned that too. "She said her mother told her that you don't want to see them, but she doesn't believe it's true." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Layla had told her children that I didn't want to see them, that I was the one keeping the distance. "Miss Williams, I want very much to see my granddaughter. The problem is that her mother and I have some unresolved issues." "I understand. But Mr. Mitchell, Emma is a very smart little girl. She knows something isn't right, and she's determined to figure out what it is. Yesterday, she asked if she could use the school computer to look up your address." I closed my eyes, imagining my 9-year-old granddaughter trying to navigate the adult complexities that had kept us apart. "What would you suggest? Would you be open to meeting Emma here at school, during lunch perhaps? I could supervise, and that way it would be neutral territory." I thought about it for a long moment. Seeing Emma would complicate everything. It would open doors I'd spent 2 years trying to close. But the idea of my granddaughter thinking I didn't want to know her was unbearable. "Yes," I said finally. "I'd like that very much." "Wonderful. How about tomorrow at 11:30? I'll tell Emma that you're coming." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a while, listening to the sounds of my chosen family going about their evening routines. Frank was in the shower humming an old song I recognized from my youth. Robert and Marcus were still discussing chess in the living room. Mrs. Chen was preparing tea for after dinner. This was peace. This was contentment. This was what I'd built from the ashes of my old life. But tomorrow, I would see my granddaughter for the first time in 6 years, and that changed everything. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best shirt and pants, the kind of clothes I would have worn to church if I still went to church. I arrived at Riverside Elementary at exactly 11:25 and checked in at the main office. Miss Williams was younger than I'd expected, probably in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mr. Mitchell, Emma is so excited to meet you. She's been talking about it all morning." She led me down a hallway covered with children's artwork and motivational posters. Through the classroom windows, I could see kids working at their desks, their faces scrunched in concentration. "Here we are," Miss Williams said, opening the door to a small conference room. "Emma, your grandfather is here." And there she was. She was small for 9 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of Layla at that age that it took my breath away. She was wearing a blue dress with white flowers on it and scuffed sneakers that suggested she was active on the playground. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, and her voice was softer than I'd expected. "Hi, Emma." Miss Williams excused herself, giving us privacy while staying close enough to supervise. Emma and I sat across from each other at the small table, both of us unsure where to begin. "Mom said you live far away," Emma said finally. "I live about 4 miles from your house." She nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. I knew she wasn't telling the truth. Tyler believed her, but I didn't. Tyler, my 5-year-old grandson whose name I barely knew. Tell me about Tyler, I said. Emma's face lit up. He's annoying, but also funny. He's obsessed with dinosaurs, and he knows all their names, even the ones with really long names that I can't pronounce. And he's starting kindergarten next year, but he's scared about it. What about you? What do you like? I like to read, and I like math, even though some of the other kids think that's weird. And I like drawing. She paused. Do you want to see something I drew? She pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack and handed it to me. It was a crayon drawing of a house with stick figures in front of it. 2 adults, 2 children, and off to the side, by himself, an older man with gray hair. That's you, she said, pointing to the isolated figure. I drew you away from everyone else because Mom said that's how you wanted it, but I didn't think that looked right. The drawing broke my heart and mended it at the same time. Emma, I want you to know that I would very much like to be part of your family. The reason I'm not has nothing to do with you or Tyler. Is it because of Mom? The directness of the question caught me off guard, but Emma was 9, not stupid. She could see what the adults around her were trying to hide. Your mother and I have some disagreements that we haven't been able to work out. About what? How could I explain to a 9-year-old that her mother only wanted a relationship with me because of my money? How could I tell her that the woman she loved and trusted was capable of such cruelty? Sometimes adults make mistakes, I said carefully, and sometimes those mistakes create problems that are hard to fix. Emma studied my face. Did you make a mistake, or did Mom make a mistake? We both made mistakes. She seemed to consider this. Could you fix them if you tried? The innocence of the question nearly undid me. If only it were that simple. I don't know, sweetheart. Will you try? I looked at this little girl, this granddaughter I'd been denied the chance to know, and felt something shift inside my chest. Something I'd thought was permanently closed began to crack open. Yes, I said, I'll try. She smiled then, and it was like seeing the sun come out after a long winter. Our lunch visit lasted only 30 minutes, but in that time, Emma told me about her favorite books, her best friend Sarah, and her secret dream of becoming a veterinarian. She asked me about my house, my friends, and whether I had any pets. She was curious about everything and afraid of nothing. When it was time for her to go back to class, she hugged me goodbye, and I felt like I was holding the future in my arms. That evening, my phone rang. Layla. What the hell do you think you're doing? Her voice was furious. You had no right to see Emma without my permission. Emma wanted to see me. She's 9 years old. She doesn't get to make decisions about who she sees. She's smart enough to know when she's being lied to. There was a pause. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that I want to be part of her life. And what else? Nothing else. I didn't tell her about the money, if that's what you're worried about. Boah, another pause. What do you want, Dad? It was the first time in 2 years that she'd called me Dad, without it sounding forced. I want to know my grandchildren. And in exchange? There's no exchange, Layla. I'm not trying to buy my way into their lives. Then what are you doing? I thought about Emma's drawing, about the old man standing alone while the family gathered together. I'm trying to be the grandfather they deserve, whether you let me or not. The silence stretched between us for a long time. They ask about you, she said finally. More and more lately. Emma especially. And what do you tell them? I've been telling them what I thought was true, that you didn't want to be bothered with family obligations. The admission hung in the air between us. I'm tired of lying to them, she whispered. Then stop. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Another long silence. If I let you see them, she said carefully, it doesn't change anything between us. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your money. I just want my children to know their grandfather. That's all I want, too. Okay, she said quietly. We can try. 3 months later, I sat in my backyard, watching Emma help Frank with the tomato plants while Tyler chased Robert's new puppy around the lawn. Layla sat beside me on the porch steps, both of us keeping a careful distance but no longer treating each other like enemies. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was something. Emma looked up from the garden and waved at me, dirt smudged on her cheek and joy radiating from her smile. Tyler abandoned the puppy and ran over to show me a rock he'd found that he was convinced was a dinosaur fossil. This wasn't the family I'd dreamed of having, but it was the family I'd chosen and the one that had chosen me back. Some of it was blood, some of it was choice, and all of it was real. As the sun set over Maple Street, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not revenge, not vindication, but the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with dignity and purpose. I had found my peace, and sometimes that's the greatest inheritance of all.